Hi everyone. So welcome to another lecture on product mindset and process mindset. So I will share the screen. Okay. So we have actually covered the aspects of process mindset and also a product mindset. Okay. We have looked at Carol Dweck's theory of growth mindset. Okay, which is very significant because she kind of asserts the significance of growth mindset and why that is important. Okay. And then we have also looked at David Goggins. Okay, so today we are going to focus a little bit more on the work of David Goggins. So particularly, David Goggins says that he has written quite a few books. Okay, um, Can't Hurt Me being one of them. The other one being Never Finished. Okay, so if you look at why Never Finished matters. Okay, so while Dweck provides psychological theory, David Goggins provides extreme lived practice. Okay, his central message: you are never finished because growth has no final form. Okay, that idea is fundamentally anti-product. Okay, the title itself rejects completion, the idea of completion in itself, and it foregrounds a certain uh, you know, a certain state of mind which is constantly seeking to develop. Okay, so that is very significant. And he argues that, while product mindset kind of focuses on arrival constantly, okay, he actually insists that there can be no final arrival, okay, that one is constantly developing and that it is a continued confrontation with reality. Okay, so that is what he is actually highlighting in his book. And what I want to foreground particularly is that this philosophy that um, that uh, we are always in a state of development. Okay, doesn't is not just limited to the individual. Okay, political decisions are made precisely based on the fact that societies are constantly evolving. Okay, that no society is in a finished state of civilizational progress or civilizational achievement. Okay, that we are constantly in a state of development, and that you know we are always kind of moving towards a higher state of evolutionary consciousness. Okay, so that is particularly important to highlight. Okay, um, the you know the what the most valuable feature of process mindset is precisely resting on the fact that it is not simply limited to the individual, but actually extends to society as a whole. Okay, so that part is important to highlight. So for example, I just want to take the example of the war in Iran right now. Okay, so there is a war in Iran, but Donald Trump is the person who has initiated the war, but you know the you know the decision that Iran would not have nuclear power kind of really goes back to Barack Obama and to US presidents prior to him. Okay, who jointly took that decision that Iran would not be given nuclear power. So that is something to really consider in the sense that um, political decisions actually reflect a continuous stream of um, developing decisions regarding a particular issue. Okay, so that is important to highlight particularly. Um, and also with regards to economic reform, okay, policies related to economic reform, you take decisions based on the fact that societies would eventually evolve. Okay, so that is a very important kind of you know assessment that we need to make. Okay, that process is not just simply limited to the individual, it actually extends to society, and kind of looking at society as as able to improve. Okay, looking at society as able to improve based on differing economic policies, differing decisions, economic decisions will actually enable better political decisions. Okay, will actually enable better political decisions. So one example is with regards to Iran and its nuclear armament. So that has been widely debated issue in international politics. However, America's decision to kind of not allow it to have a nuclear armament is actually the result of a lot of discussion based on that particular topic. Okay, so in this one instance, it might feel that we are America as a whole is not really thinking towards integrating Middle East decisions, but actually it cannot be taken as a one-off event. Okay, because if you look at Donald Trump's previous decisions with regards to the Middle East. So you have the Abraham Accords, which came in 2020, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations like UAE and Bahrain. It marked a significant diplomatic shift in the Middle East and focused on economic and technological cooperation and reduced tensions between countries in the Middle East. Okay, so what is important to kind of think about is that a lot of the stability in society is dependent on political decisions and the outlook of politicians to kind of see a situation as liable to change. Okay, so that is important to highlight. In this particular case of war against Iran is one particular instance where it feels like um, it's an encouragement of war for war's sake, but particularly within the larger scheme, if you look at it in light of the Abraham Accords, which was established in 2020, you find that it is part of an evolving process, and perhaps later it will actually yield peace. Okay, so that might actually come about. So that is important to highlight. So now, so that is one important thing that I wanted to say. Process mindset is not just limited to the individual, but actually extends to society, extends to the way in which economic policies, political decisions, all of these actions are taken. Okay, in order to kind of influence the larger development of society and the larger changes in international relations. All of that is connected to the very outlook of the world and society not being in a final state of conflict resolution. Okay, conflicts arise and have to be dealt with when they arise. Next, you have Goggins' rejection of external validation. So Goggins repeatedly argues that medals, praise, and public admiration cannot sustain discipline. He emphasizes private standards, okay, such as internal honesty and brutal self-audit. So that is also very significant. This is an argument made by Goggins, that it's important to set private standards. And again, if you kind of think about it, this actually goes back to something that Michel Foucault asserts. All right, when he actually, tries to look back into a time when um, self-governance was implemented by the individual and not imposed by society. Okay, so the reason why he goes into a study of prisons. Right. So the reason why Michel Foucault goes into a study of prisons, in the first place, and various other, state apparatuses that function as tools of governance and as tools of disciplining, okay, such as hospitals, such as asylums. He goes and looks at these institutions because he is interested in looking at how bodies are regulated, okay, how subjects are created by the state. All right, and particularly he kind of goes he kind of extends his study beyond state institutions in order to find out how do individuals regulate themselves. And for doing that, he goes and looks at the writings of the pre-Socratics. Okay, all of this was studied by me. I learned all of it while doing a course for Prakash Kona, sir. Okay, so he was brilliant while talking about the Socratics and the pre-Socratics. Um, Right. So he actually, and he had a course on, the Socratics in while he was teaching in English and Foreign Languages University. I just wanted to say that as a shout out to one of the best professors. So, right. So Michel Foucault actually goes and looks at the diaries and the journals written by pre-Socratics. Okay, and he argues that diary writing and journal writing was a form of self-disciplining. Okay, where the extent of the state's power of regulating the individual was kind of put on hold, was controlled by the individual himself. Okay, so that, or put in check. Okay, so that is a very important thing, and David Goggins is actually kind of really linking his study to that kind of knowledge. Okay, where he says that it is important to set certain private standards for perform brutal audits, self audits, and kind of show and a certain kind of internal honesty. Okay, so all of this means that if you're working out, you work out not just for results. Okay, you work out because because you have long term goals. Okay, not just short term goals to see that you're beefed up and to see that your muscles are showing. It's just to kind of build internal strength. Okay, uh, Tetra fort anterior more. Okay, so that is to be strong from inside. Okay, so that is something that David Goggins asserts in his book. Okay, and again he says that internal war matters more than applause. All right, so that is also very significant. And he also says that what is most important is to kind of move towards that pure process orientation. So very significant to take that into account. Next, you have the idea of the accountability mirror. Okay, so one of Goggins' strongest tools is the accountability mirror. Okay, he asks individuals to confront themselves directly. Okay, such thinking works because process mindset requires daily truths. Okay, a daily assertion of truths. All right, being honest with yourself, immediate correction, ownership, taking ownership of one's decisions. Okay, so all of that is very significant. And product mindset necessarily asks, product mindset would, one sec. Mm, one sec, I think. Please. skipped a little ahead. Yeah. Product mindset asks, did I succeed? Okay, that becoming the most important kind of statement made by you know uh, the individual. Okay, internally. Okay, you're constantly asking, did I succeed? Did I win? All right, but process mindset largely asks, what can be done in order to be better? Okay, what can be done to appreciate the journey? I will obviously assert that within institutions, within capitalist institutions in which we are working right now, individuals are largely turned into Pavlov's dogs. Okay, where they have to respond to cues rather than being able to take decisions themselves. I think that needs to change largely. But yeah, so process mindset asks, what can be done in order to be better. And like I said, it is not just linked to the individual. Okay, it's not just limited to the decisions of the individual. It actually extends to larger decisions related to groups and societies. Okay, which would actually show that societies like individuals are in a state of evolution, constant evolution. And I would just like to say that, again, with an example from America, because, everything seems to revolve around America at the present moment because of the Iran war. So if you kind of look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts, okay, which came out in 2017, also during the time of Donald Trump, you find that corporate tax rates were reduced and individual taxes were adjusted such that it boosted business investment and economic growth, and unemployment reached historically low levels prior to the pandemic. Okay, so that is very significant to take into account. Stock markets also saw very strong gains during that time. Okay, so if there is an economic, plunge at any given point, you would actually see it as part of a general evolving process. It's not a constant. Okay. Similarly, when you're looking at the individual, if you're just focusing on one particular incident where you haven't succeeded, that should not be your sole way of thinking about um, of thinking um, about yourself, okay, and about the situation, because they're all liable to change. All right. So that is very significant to take into account. Next, you have identity through repetition, which is also very significant. So Goggins rejects identity labels such as he's a strong person, he's a successful person, he's an accomplished person, because he actually treats identity as earned daily. Okay, so it means that you're not disciplined because of past effort. You're disciplined only if today's behavior reflects discipline. Okay, so that is very significant. This becomes psychologically powerful because product mindset uses past achievements as shelter. Okay, so important to highlight that bit as well. Okay, next you have certain considerations about what are the core psychological shifts. Okay, so again, like I said, focusing on the journey is the most important aspect of process mindset. What process mindset upholds is a focusing on the journey. Okay, and a kind of outlook towards a system that would survive all forms of difficulty. Okay, so that is also important, and it also changes emotional energy dramatically. Okay, focusing on the journey rather than the end goal and leads to a change in the emotional energy of the person, making it possible to work more. Okay, do more. All right. But obviously, again, like I said, capitalist institutions, all of the institutions that we are working in, whether they be industrial, whether they be academic, they are largely transforming individuals into Pavlov's dogs. And that is very, very detrimental to the ability to think for oneself. Okay. Um, yeah, not everyone wants to write a book. Okay. Some people might want to write a book and not write a book. All right. Just making everybody into Pavlov's dog in for fear of the fact that everyone is going to start writing books and all of those books will be Nobel Prize worthy is silly. We should just let individuals be individuals rather than making them into Pavlov's dogs. But capitalist institutions do not actually adhere to that kind of a logic, and we have to kind of acknowledge that. Anyway, it's a real travesty. Replacing finish line thinking with cycle thinking. Okay, so that is also important. So, product mindset imagines start, effort, finish, and then resting. Okay, while process mindset imagines effort, feedback, adjustment as well, and then repetition. Okay, and what process mindset argues is that no final psychological collapse is uh, is yeah, no final psychological collapse. There can be no final psychological collapse after completion of a project because you are always picking yourself up and repeating what you have done, regardless of the outcome. Okay, so that is a very significant aspect uh, uh, of process mindset thinking. Okay, um, it is like being it is like being a celebrity. Okay, and constantly dealing with criticism. Okay, when your work has been appreciated by a certain group of people, and then all of a sudden you face criticism from another group of people. Okay, and you have to constantly keep repeating yourself. Okay, uh, that it's actually not the right way to do things, obviously, but you largely feel that that is how the world works at present. Okay, you have to keep repeating yourself, you have to keep proving why your point of view matters. Okay, why the critics that you have looked at and referred to while maybe perhaps working on your project. Okay, the kind of help that you have sought, why that matters over other kinds of help that you might have taken. So that aspect is very significant to take into account. Okay, and right. um Okay. So, for example, I just want to give an example from my own life. I think that is most important in order to make it even more engaging, personally engaging. And that is, recently I presented a paper which kind of, uh, you know, for which I had a minimum amount of primary text resources. Okay, so I had to really dig around to kind of look at secondary materials and kind of the kind of critics to kind of bring in to the paper. And critics like Terry Eagleton's writings on uh, particular events in Ireland, those were things that I had to do on my own. And the so there were there can be people who appreciate that kind of writing, and then on the other hand there might be others who do not appreciate that kind of writing. Okay, but the fact of the matter remains that uh, it was it was a paper for presentation. Okay, it is not a final product. Okay, so people judging that paper and kind of taking it up as the final product meant for publication is problematic. Okay, so that is important to highlight. Okay, so right. So there is no final kind of psychological collapse, or there shouldn't be, at least according to David Goggins, because we are always kind of, repeating the process over and over again. Okay, and so the mindset is attached to the process rather than the product. Okay. So for example, yeah. So that is mostly what I wanted to say. Um, then redefining success daily. Okay, instead of I will succeed if I complete the whole project, one should say that I succeed today if I complete a certain amount of work. Okay, so a focus on regular incremental progress rather than completing the whole piece of work at one go. Okay, so that is also highlighted by process mindset. And also, very importantly, these are the these are the points of process mindset. One should track inputs and not just outputs. Okay, so rather than tracking how much marks you received, okay, how much salary you are gaining, okay, one should actually be focusing on the attention you're giving to your work, okay, the hours that you have spent studying. So that is a way in which one tracks inputs rather than just outputs. So that is very significant to highlight. Next, you have building friction rituals. So choosing one difficult, repeatable action daily. So that becomes important. Okay. Um, this trains identity away from emotional dependence. Okay. Um, right. So that is very significant. Such as cold start breathing, okay, hard exercise, writing before motivation. All right. So that these are difficult tasks. Okay, but it is important to build that as part of one's practice of work. Okay, because it trains identity to kind of evolve away from an emotional dependence on comforting activities. Okay, comforting activities are necessary, but one should not kind of derive one's sense of completion or sense of fulfillment from an activity that one is able to do on a regular basis. Okay, so rather than that, focusing on something which is more difficult is a better way to kind of progress and kind of challenge thinking as well. Next, you have focus on emotional obstacles. Okay, so you might be afraid of slow progress. Okay, most people quit because progress looks invisible. Okay, so that is important to take into account. But invisible progress is something that can be mapped. Okay, like I said, if you kind of focus on what you're putting into your work, okay, you can actually see that the invisibility of progress actually becomes more and more apparent. Okay, so if you keep track of the hours that you're spending doing something, okay, or learning something, okay, if you keep track of you know um the kind of projects you have taken up in order to better yourself, or in order to gain more credibility as an employee, all of that will actually make progress more apparent rather than just invisible. Okay, so that is very significant to highlight. So if we kind of compare product mindset and process mindset, so product mindset compares products, okay, whereas process mindset compares the consistency put into achieving those products. Okay, so that is very significant. Um, right. Many abandon process because shame from imperfection becomes unbearable. Okay, so that is important. Next, reading both the authors together. So Dweck, if we kind of place Dweck alongside Goggins, you find that Dweck gives the framework of process mindset, why it is important to take up process mindset, how it is different from product mindset. And Dweck actually goes on to explain why people fear, pushing themselves. Okay, why do people fear taking up the process mindset over the product mindset? That is the focus of Goggins' work. He also explains how to endure challenges behaviorally. Okay, and together they actually kind of provide a larger framework of thought where you have the cognitive reframing of the mind following Dweck's analysis of mindsets, and you have a study of how to execute one's principles based on the process mindset. Okay, so that combination in itself becomes very powerful you know to um, to life as a whole. Okay, and then you have language rewrites for daily life. Okay, so these are important parts of of imbibing process mindset. So you have to change your internal speech. Okay, you must write, I must prove myself, I must train honestly, instead of I need fast success, I need repeatable standards. All right. Um, these challenges shift all sorry These language shifts alter nervous system response. Okay, so that is also significant to take note of. Finally, you have a consideration of process in study, work, and creativity. So again, in study, rather than thinking about how to achieve the highest possible rank or to do the best possible uh, task in the quickest possible manner, you should actually focus on how you are daily comprehending your activities. Okay, so that becomes more important according to process mindset. Rather than saying that you need promotion immediately, you must focus on how to build competence over time. Okay, so that is a very significant aspect of process mindset. And the another part of the conclusive discussion is that process mindset eventually produces better products. Okay, so ironically, process mindset often produces superior products because there is reduced fear. Okay, um, there is reduced fear, and it increases the possibilities of experimentations. Okay, you also focus on experimentation as a way of increasing learning habits. Okay, and necessarily having developing different kinds of learning habits increases your mastery over a particular subject. That mastery in itself then improves the products, and thus product obsession of improves the product. So that becomes very significant rather than being obsessed with the product and kind of hurrying to kind of create a product which might not fulfill all of the criteria required for it to be a masterful product. Okay, so that is very significant to highlight as well. Okay, next we are going to look at how it changes identity, and like I said, I am particularly connecting it also to societal shift. Okay, um, yeah, so that is significant to take into account because transformations in mindset actually leads to transformations in society. Okay, transformations in economic and political policies actually lead to outcomes in society. Of course, there are shifts, as I was mentioning, with regards to the Abraham Accords, which came out during Trump's time in 2020, and the kind of instability that we see right now in the Middle East. Okay, that these are in contrast with each other. Okay, but particularly what it goes to show is that periods of instabilities persist only for it to resolve itself. Okay, so obviously this is part of the Hegelian uh, argument as well. Okay, so if you are presented with something which is in a resolved state, it will necessarily move towards its antithesis, okay, which will be a kind of dismantling of set standards, set beliefs, set ideas, and then again that antithesis will again move towards a resolution. Okay, so that is how human history has largely developed and progressed. So we have to kind of take these shifts into account, and so identity shift also becomes uh, particularly important, in light of all of these, advancements in the study of human psychology. Okay, so that is significant to take note of. Right. So, how can you kind of build the daily process framework? I have given you 5 daily questions that you can ask yourself. All right. What difficult thing did I not avoid today? Where did I improve method? What error taught me something? Did I complete my minimum standard? What repeats tomorrow? Okay. These are questions that will help you to promote a, a, a kind of consciousness which will produce that daily process mindset. Okay, so that is important to highlight. And next you have an acknowledgement of the fact that um, once you acknowledgement of the fact that you are able to make your own decisions, you do not depend on external validation for making your own decisions. um, your idea of discipline actually stabilizes because it comes from within and not from external factors. Okay, and identity no longer depends on an immediate verdict from an external authority. It is something that you develop every day. Okay, so very significant. um, and then to conclude, to shift from product to process mindset is not merely productivity advice, it is also a philosophical reorganization of the self. Carol Dweck teaches that growth requires abandoning fixed interpretations of ability, and David Goggins teaches that discipline must survive discomfort long after motivation disappears. The deepest lesson from Never Finished is that no human being reaches a final completed form. The deepest lesson from mindset is that the new psychology of success is that development depends on what we believe about difficulty. Okay, so thank you all so much for listening.